April 7, 1943, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The air shimmered under the Pacific sun as the smell of fuel and oil hung heavy over the battered runway. A metallic click echoed as the hose disconnected from the Grumman F-4F Wildcat. Second Lieutenant James Elms Sweat, his uniform clinging to him in the heat, climbed into his cockpit. His heart beat steady, but his hands, rough from years working in his father's marine turbine shop in San Francisco, betrayed a calm that was more mechanical instinct than nerves. What he didn't know was that the next 15 minutes would lift him from obscurity, an ordinary American worker, to the status of a living legend. As the ground crews stepped back and the canopy sealed shut, a voice cracked through the radio. Condition red, condition very red. Then came the words that made every pilot tense. 150 Japanese aircraft inbound from the north. It was the largest enemy raid since Pearl Harbor. And the men of Guadalcanal, just 76 Allied fighters, were all that stood between the incoming armada and the U.S. fleet below. James Elms Sweat was only 22. He had never fired a gun in combat, never seen an enemy aircraft outside of training reels. But what none of the Japanese pilots knew as they advanced in their tight, disciplined formations was that the young Marine waiting for them possessed a combination of technical genius, sharp instincts, and courage that would soon rewrite the day's history. James had been born in Seattle in 1920, raised among machines, noise, and grease. His father, George, was an engineer who built marine pumps and turbines, unglamorous but vital work that kept ships alive. Young James grew up understanding the rhythm of machinery. To him, engines had a heartbeat, and precision meant survival. There was nothing in his youth that screamed hero. He went to San Mateo High, then to the local college, just another working-class kid. But when the government launched its civilian pilot training program, James signed up without hesitation. The first time he took off, something clicked. Flying wasn't work. It was instinct. By the time he joined the Navy's flight school, he had 450 hours of flight time, more than some instructors. He finished in the top 10%, earning his gold wings and, at his own request, transferred to the Marine Corps. A year later, he found himself in the sweltering heat of the South Pacific, part of VMF 221, the same squadron that had fought and bled at Wake Island. His aircraft, the stubby, rugged Grumman F-4F Wildcat. It wasn't fast or sleek like the Japanese Zero, but it could take punishment and dish it back out. Henderson Field wasn't much of a base. A single steel runway carved out of jungle mud, surrounded by sandbags and tents. Malaria, heat, and rain ruled the place. But Henderson was the key to the Solomons, and the Solomons were the lifeline to Australia. Every pilot knew that if Henderson fell, the Pacific might follow. For days, Sweat had flown patrols without action. But on that April afternoon, the waiting ended. Japanese bombers, nearly 200 aircraft, were heading straight for Guadalcanal in a massive counteroffensive planned by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself. The mission's goal: crush American air power and sink the ships at Tulagi Harbor. At 2:00 p.m., as Sweat's division of Wildcats returned from a routine patrol, the warning came through. "Launch everything," his operations officer barked. Mechanics yanked the fuel hoses out mid-fill, gasoline spilling onto the runway. Sweat scrambled back into his Wildcat, Bureau number 2284. The propeller spun, the twin Wasp engine roared, and the fighter clawed down the runway. He barely cleared the trees, then began the slow, agonizing climb for altitude. Every second mattered. The Japanese were minutes away. Above the blue Pacific, the sky filled with American fighters, Wildcats, Corsairs, P-38s, and P-40s, all rising in desperate unison. Sweat's eyes scanned the horizon. Then he saw them, tiny black dots against the northern sky, swelling larger with terrifying speed. "Tally-ho! Bandits 12 o'clock high," he called over the radio. Multiple bogeys. Fighter command answered simply. All fighters engage. Good hunting. No tactics, no plans, just survival. Sweat rolled his Wildcat into a steep dive, aiming for the enemy formation. Below, Japanese Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers flew in precise lines, sunlight glinting off their wings. They were slow, each carrying a 1,000-pound bomb, but if they reached the ships, they could tear the harbor apart. Sweat locked onto 3 bombers that had drifted slightly off course. He lined up behind the last one, centered it in his sight, and pressed the trigger. The Wildcat erupted with the roar of 650 caliber guns. Tracers streaked forward. The first Val burst into flames, its rear gunner vanishing in smoke. Sweat banked and dove onto the next. Another burst. Another explosion. Within seconds, 2 bombers were falling into the ocean. He climbed, turned, and dove again. The third enemy exploded mid-air, scattering debris through the sunlight. 3 kills, 90 seconds, his first combat ever. Then anti-aircraft shells burst around him. American gunners below fired blindly into the sky, not distinguishing friend from foe. One shell detonated near his wing, peppering the Wildcat with shrapnel. The aileron was damaged. The plane jerked and wobbled, but Sweat held it steady. He checked his gauges. Oil pressure steady, engine temp good. He stayed in the fight. Ahead, he spotted another formation of 6 bombers heading for Tulagi Harbor. Their fighter escort was gone. He dove again, guns blazing. The first Val disintegrated, the explosion so close it shook his Wildcat. The second burst into flames. One by one, he cut them down. Short, precise bursts. No wasted ammunition. His training guided every move, every squeeze of the trigger. Another Val went down, then another. The 6th took longer. Sweat had to close to near point-blank range. So close he could see the Japanese gunner's terrified eyes. He fired until the bomber exploded. 7 kills, 15 minutes. But when he lined up his next target and pressed the trigger, nothing. Empty. He was out of ammunition. He could have turned back. Any sane pilot would have. Instead, he kept charging at the last bomber, trying to force it to break off its dive. The Japanese gunner fired back, bullets ripping through Sweat's canopy. The glass shattered. Fragments cut his face and filled his eyes with blood. The engine coughed, sputtered, then began smoking. The oil cooler was gone. His Wildcat was dying. With his face bleeding and the engine choking, Sweat turned for home. Henderson Field lay 15 miles away. The black smoke thickened. The propeller slowed. Then, silence. The engine seized, dead. His fighter became a glider over the Pacific. He trimmed the controls, scanned the water, and spotted a calm stretch near Florida Island. If he ditched just right, he might survive. He opened the canopy, tightened his harness, and brought the nose up. The Wildcat hit the water hard. The impact smashed his nose and threw him against the panel. The cockpit filled with water instantly. The heavy engine dragged the plane down. He reached for his belt, fumbling through the blood and seawater. The harness jammed. The water rose. He was drowning. He kicked, pulled, screamed underwater. Finally, with one desperate heave, the strap tore loose. He shot upward, lungs burning. His life vest failed to inflate. Then, suddenly, a hiss. It filled with air. He burst through the surface, gasping and bleeding, but alive. Minutes later, a Coast Guard rescue boat spotted him. They hauled him aboard, handed him morphine and a bottle of whiskey. He drank, still dazed. By the time they reached shore, the battle was over. The Japanese had lost dozens of planes. The fleet was safe. And Second Lieutenant James Elms Sweat, on his very first combat mission, had shot down 7 enemy aircraft. Word spread quickly. Witnesses confirmed his kills. Admiral Mark Mitcher personally nominated him for the Medal of Honor. Sweat would go on to fly over 100 missions, scoring 15 confirmed victories before the end of the war. He was 23 years old. his story didn't end there. He survived another ditching months later, rescued by islanders who paddled him through enemy waters. He met President Roosevelt at the White House, and when the war ended, he returned home to the same machine shop he'd left years before. The same smell of oil and steel, the same rhythm of machinery that had once trained his hands to fly. He never bragged about the 7 kills. He talked about teamwork, maintenance, and preparation. He taught kids about responsibility and respect, not glory. Do your job, he'd tell them. Support your teammates. Take care of your equipment. That was what mattered most to him. In 2006, the History Channel recreated his battle in the series Dogfights. Viewers saw computer-generated explosions, tracer fire, and chaos, but Sweat's voice in the episode remained calm, almost technical, describing his maneuvers as if explaining a machine. He had always been that way, steady, humble, precise. On January 18, 2009, Colonel James Elms Sweat passed away at 88. At his funeral, Marine jets roared overhead in a missing man formation. The flag was folded, taps played, and his story, one of instinct, courage, and unshakable will, came to rest with the man himself. 15 minutes had turned a quiet engineer's son into one of America's greatest airmen. And yet, James Elms Sweat never believed he was extraordinary. To him, he was just a man doing his job, one flight, one mission, one decision at a time. But history will remember those 15 minutes over Guadalcanal as the day an ordinary man met destiny in the skies. Ken Curtis will forever be remembered as Festus Hagen from Gunsmoke, the scruffy, quick-witted deputy with a heart of gold. On screen, he captured the love of millions through his humor and down-to-earth charm, becoming one of television's most iconic Western figures. But behind that beloved image was a man whose real life was far more complicated. Ken faced struggles, grudges, and disappointments that he rarely spoke about. And before his death, he quietly revealed 5 Hollywood figures he had deep conflicts with, names that reflected the challenges he endured behind the scenes. Born Curtis Wayne Gates on July 2, 1916, in Lamar, Colorado, Ken's early years were unlike those of any other child. His father, Dan Gates, was the local sheriff, and the family lived in an apartment above the Bent County Jail. Instead of playgrounds and backyards, Ken grew up surrounded by the sounds of clanging bars and echoing footsteps. His mother, Nellie, worked as the jail cook, preparing meals for inmates and her family alike. Watching her serve food through the jail bars gave young Ken a rare and humbling glimpse into a world of hardship and humanity that would later shape his character both on and off screen. Ken showed a natural gift for music, but practicality ruled during the Great Depression. His parents encouraged him to study medicine, and for a while, he followed that path at Colorado College. Yet, after 2 years, he realized his heart wasn't in it. His soul belonged to music. Leaving medical school behind, he chased his dream of singing and joined Tommy Dorsey's band in the early 1940s, not long after Frank Sinatra's departure. Dorsey advised him to change his name to something snappier, and thus Ken Curtis was born. His smooth voice and stage charisma quickly won audiences over, and soon he was performing with the Sons of the Pioneers, one of America's most beloved Western groups. His rich, heartfelt vocals on classics like Room Full of Roses and Ghost Riders in the Sky helped define the golden era of Western music. By the late 1940s, Ken had his own radio program, Chuck Wagon Jamboree, a 15-minute show that mixed music, comedy, and storytelling, a format that hinted at his future in acting. Hollywood soon took notice, and Curtis transitioned to films, appearing in Western-themed musicals and adventure stories. His charm and authenticity made him a natural fit for the screen, and before long, he was working with legends like John Ford and John Wayne, appearing in classics that cemented his place among the greats of American Western cinema. But fame came with its share of friction. Ken Curtis later admitted that he had conflicts with 5 figures in his professional life, starting with Gunsmoke's towering star, James Arness. Though their on-screen chemistry as Festus and Marshal Matt Dillon was electric, Curtis sometimes struggled in Arness's shadow, as his beloved deputy character was always secondary to the lead. There were also reported clashes with Milburn Stone, who played Doc Adams, over creative differences and screen time. Producer John Mantley was another source of frustration, as the two frequently disagreed over pay and the direction of Festus's character. Rumors of tension with Amanda Blake, who played Miss Kitty, also circulated, possibly due to her feeling overshadowed by Festus's growing popularity. Lastly, Curtis had mixed feelings about Dennis Weaver, who had played Chester, the original deputy before Festus, a role Curtis had to live up to and eventually surpass. Though these conflicts varied in nature, they reflected the competitive, ego-driven world of Hollywood that Curtis often found distasteful. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, Ken's portrayal of Festus Hagen became legendary. Originally meant for a single episode, Festus's rough-edged humor, loyalty, and good heart turned him into one of Gunsmoke's most cherished characters. Ken remained in the role for 11 years and over 300 episodes, embodying the spirit of the American West with authenticity and heart. He treated every scene with respect, never letting fatigue or fame affect his performance. While many actors grew tired of being typecast, Ken embraced Festus, proud of what the character meant to fans across the country. Off-screen, Ken's life was shaped by love, heartbreak, and quiet devotion. His first 2 marriages, to actress Lorraine Page in 1943 and Barbara Ford, daughter of the famed director John Ford in 1952, ended in divorce, though he remained on good terms with both women. It wasn't until he met Tori Connolly in 1966 that Ken found true peace. Tori wasn't part of Hollywood. She was grounded, kind, and deeply loyal. Together they built a life far removed from fame, filled with travel, laughter, and family. Ken became a devoted stepfather to Tori's 2 children, cherishing the simple joys that fame often stole from others. Even so, Ken's life wasn't without controversy. When Gunsmoke, Return to Dodge aired in 1987, fans were disappointed to see Festus missing. It turned out Ken had declined the role after being offered what he felt was an insultingly low salary. He refused out of principle, not pride, believing that years of loyalty to the show deserved more respect. His decision sparked debate, but true to his nature, Ken never fueled the controversy. He simply moved on. In his later years, Ken quietly supported conservative political causes, including Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan, but he remained largely private, focusing on his family and faith. After Gunsmoke, he took on smaller acting roles, including The Yellow Rose in 1983 and his final film appearance in 1991's Conager alongside Sam Elliott. That same year, on April 28th, Ken Curtis passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74. His ashes were scattered across the plains of Colorado, a fitting tribute to a man who had carried the true spirit of the West in his heart, all his life. Ken Curtis was more than a character actor. He was a symbol of authenticity in a world of illusion. From the jailhouse of his youth to the Hollywood sets that made him famous, he lived by his own code, humble, loyal, and quietly defiant. To this day, Festus Hagen remains one of the most beloved figures in television history. And behind that scruffy voice and crooked grin was a man who understood what it meant to be real in an industry that so rarely was.